Good afternoon. I know some people are still joining us, but we are going to get started because we do have such a wonderful panel, and we want to obviously give them every opportunity of sharing their experiences with us. My name is Becky Perry. I'm from the University of Sheffield, and together with my colleague...
Yeah, I'm Fiona Scott, also a lecturer in digital literacies at the University of Sheffield.
And we are very grateful to UKLA for asking us to organise this panel discussion focused on creativity, play and digital media. I think it stems a little bit from conversations I've had over the years where I've come to UKLA and thought how fantastic to have people who are writing texts for children here. At the conference last year we had David Armand. There's been a real alumni of exciting people, but actually I've also always thought we need to have people here who are writing texts in all sorts of different media and providing opportunities for children to engage with media, including the digital. And so we have a really interesting panel of people who both create texts for children, story and other forms, and also provide opportunities for children to engage and create texts themselves. I'm not going to, their full biographies are in the programme, and if I actually spent the whole, if I introduced and gave you all of their biographies, that would probably use up the whole session, but they do have really interesting biographies to read, and I say that because have a look at the diversity and complexity and range of different things that they do. It's really interesting to see, maybe this is what we should be thinking about in terms of the children that we're working with, is that there's no longer a simple route into one progression, one career. There's actually you have to be a portfolio person these days, don't you? And I think we have a really fantastically portfolio collection of people. So we have Shana Jackson, who we lured to Sheffield with great excitement and is now the artistic director of Sight Gallery, and I will let her tell you a little bit more about that. We have Lee Hodgkinson, who is a children's illustrator and writer that also creates and animates wonderful media for children, and you'll all be familiar with her text, particularly if you have young children or if you've worked with young children. We have Chris Lindgren, who really was one of the founding people who set up Toca Boca, and if you haven't heard of Toca Boca, go home and talk to 3, 4, 5-year-olds who have, but she's now going out on her own and doing exciting things, which I'm sure she'll tell you about. And we have Ian Simmons, who is the director, chief executive, something very fancy, at the good. And Ian, we are also grateful to have lured to Sheffield. He has brought the most fantastic project of the National Video Game Museum to Sheffield, which we're super excited to have and have the opportunity to work with him. And he also has links with a whole range of organisations in relation to children's video game playing. Well, everybody's video game playing, actually. But I'm going to give you very short time to add anything to your biographies that you might want to.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Shana. I'm the artistic director at Sight Gallery. Sight Gallery is an institution that focuses on new media, moving image and performance. We're on Brown Street, so you all come along while you're here. And we have a well-established young people's programme that is intertwined with our programming of exhibitions. Alongside of Sight Gallery, I'm a children's author. My debut novel came out in April. It's called High Rise Mystery, about 2 young black detectives who solve a murder on their estate. So I have somebody called me a millennial the other day, because I have many strings to my bow, apparently. I was just pleased to be mistaken for somebody that young. So that was great. And before I worked at Sight, I worked at the Tate Gallery for many years, starting an initiative called Tate Kids. I was the creative director of an app called Hopster, which is like a Netflix for babies with games, and doing a range of things. So yeah, really pleased to be here. Got lots of thoughts.
Lee?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Lee Hodgkinson, and as Becky said, I write and illustrate picture books, but originally I was an animation filmmaker, and more recently I've collaborated with my husband, who is also an animation director, to make CBBC's animated show called Olibob Top, which is a narrative-driven series that's based around shapes and pattern and colour and creative play. So we've just finished making the second series, and that's now on the TV, and I'm back to making books, so I kind of flip between two things, and during all of those things I go go to literature festivals and do events and go into schools and do workshops with kids. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, I'm Chris Lindgren. I'm located in Stockholm, in Sweden, and I've been with Tokaboka for 8 years. I was one of the 2 first employees, and I've had 2 different roles there. First as a play designer, designing concepts for what to take on and how it should work and interact, and then as a researcher for play testing all the concepts and bringing in kids into the design process. And right now I'm on my own, as Becky said, so I'm taking on a project for a children's book publisher at the moment. I'm really excited about that, and it makes perfect sense to be here in this context. That's me.
Hello, I'm Ian. Just to follow up on what Becky said really about portfolio careers. So I'm an arts and music person that stumbled into video games. So I spent most of my 20s working as a musical director in kind of commercial theatre and the difficult live art theatre that everybody hates. And then kind of drifted out of that into video games when it became clear that there were this kind of interesting, really shambolic field that nobody really knows what they are. So they represent this meeting point, which for anyone who's interested in hybrid arts or connecting things, can be this fantastically interesting place, which you wouldn't think was apparent were you to look at the mainstream industry. So I think that's why I'd kind of, that's the kind of promise of video games is kind of what I'm particularly interested in, rather than necessarily what they are at the moment. I set up a festival called Game City in Nottingham in 2006. I wanted to work at the South End, which was an interactive and arts festival that happened to be about video games, rather than just a kind of way to help people play them. And that's the word I'm most interested in. Basically not being a CEO and trying to get out of the terrible levels of bureaucracy that I'm suddenly finding myself entrapped in. It's like a counselling session now.
I just want to so I first heard from each of these people really as a speaker at a conference elsewhere. And what I was really captivated by was their ability to identify memories, recollections, reflections on really creative moments that young people and children had encountered, and that they had observed and really thought about and learnt from. So I have asked each of them to share with you one memory from their own sphere of work that has an observation that they might like to share about creativity and young children. So I'll hand over to you, Shane.
I'll start. I might cheat and do 2. If I keep them really brief. So I used to work at Tate. I was the editor of a website called Tate Kids, which we launched in 2007. And in 2008, we had an exhibition at Tate Modern called Street Art, where we had international street artists come and graffiti the side of Tate Modern. It was great. So what I did in response to that was create an interactive toy called Street Art that sat on the Take Kids website, which was really quaintly built in Flash, which is now RIP Flash. And it was, the background of this game was a photograph of Tate Modern, and there was a little backpack with spray cans and stickers and all kinds of things in there for children. And the creativity that came through this really simple interactivity was astounding. So everything on the Take Kids website had to be pre-moderated, meaning I had to check everything before it went live. And I would look in the system and I'd be getting 3,000 or 4,000 images a day from children across the world. And I wish I don't know, so I'll forward you some links, I can show you the kind of work that came out of it. But people were just exquisite in their detail with really, really simple, basic tools. It was incredible. But interestingly, too, you would notice how kids were using it to think about current events. So Michael Jackson died in 2009, and there was, I remember distinctly a Michael Jackson image with the darker skinned Michael Jackson, the lighter skinned Michael Jackson, and it was like RIP MJ from a child, or they would do really incredibly detailed stuff, or they would use it, I guess, for a cathartic way and write really like rude things on there, I guess, to test their boundaries to see if they'd make it to the live website, but obviously they didn't. I was onto them, but it was really interesting to see the kind of horrible stuff they were saying and what they wanted to get out of their systems. And I was really pleased to be able to provide that kind of safe space for them to just tinker. I suppose that was really great. Another one, really quickly, is I used to run an initiative in Kent, in Sittingbourne, called Squad 34, and it was to get young people to engage with their local area, but also engage with digital technology. And we found that the best way of doing that was literally through the mobile phone. So we would, instead of just taking selfies in a kind of way, we would teach them about portraits and give them a bit of context for it and show them how to maybe use the right light. And that was a really good way of engaging people with technology that they had, rather than worrying about having, a suite of iPads or an iPod. It was really immediate, and that was really a really nice moment.
So my story example isn't really rooted in a sort of digital context, but it kind of led to something which is a digital context, I guess. So I spoke before about how in my role as author illustrator, I still do go around schools and do workshops. And what I really like to do is to kind of do something, a creative sort of exercise, which gets children making stuff and doing stuff and freeing them up. And I began to notice, going around schools and talking to kids and involving kids, that there was a level of kind of anxiety in them faced with a creative task, because if you're given a blank piece of paper, I mean, I feel like this too, it's incredibly daunting and intimidating, and they feel like, even just by making a mark on the paper, that they have ruined it, or they'll make a mistake and it all seems really final. And this kind of got me thinking, and it really saddened me, because I think creativity for me is such a joyful, pleasurable thing, and I work predominantly in collage, I guess, thinking about it. It makes sense for that very reason, that I like to mess up the page and make everything messy, so it's already ruined, so there's no jeopardy about kind of me making mistakes, because then once it's all messed up, I can then play and have fun, and it can only get better. So I began introducing into my workshops this idea of collage, and it was incredible to see. It was instant, a difference in terms of how the children approach this exercise. So I would take to a workshop a set of really basic shapes with different colours and different patterns on, and with that really limited kind of library of tools, the results were, so diverse and so individual that it felt really magical and beautiful to me. So each child I got to kind of play with these shapes, and you could see instantly they were relaxed. They weren't stressed out. They didn't think they would be judged, and it wasn't final, so they could just move things around. And what I began to see is instantly, because it's almost like their minds weren't filled with being stressed and having the anxiety that they would be judged on the end result, their minds were freed up to think of other stuff. So they were playing around and kind of making characters and environments, and simultaneously they were coming up with narratives and ideas and concepts, and it was really free-flowing. And I think from then I've realised it's kind of encapsulated the whole kind of concept of creative play for me, and how completely important that is to eliminate that idea of stress and anxiety and jeopardy and feeling precious about what you're doing, but actually having a space in the middle where you can enjoy the journey and feel relaxed, that you can make mistakes and you can take risks in your creativity. And I think that's what I try and do, and our series Olibob Top really came out of those ideas of a creative play, because each episode is about, making character out of shapes. So it's about the journey, not the end destination. So that's kind of my story.
Okay, my memory then is about a playtesting session a couple of years ago, we were working on an app that was targeting 3 to 6 year olds. And the idea was you were supposed to develop plant monsters, or you can develop plant monsters in this concept. So it turned out to be an app called Toka Lab Plants in the end. And I had a digital prototype, and I was bringing it to a preschool and met 5-year-olds there to play it. And at the same time, the Eurovision Song Contest was going on, and it's really huge in Sweden amongst kids. So this specific pair of kids that I was playing with, they were all about singing and performing in their heads at that moment. And this app, it had a number of stations with tools that you could use on the plants that would make them transform. And it also had a chart where you could, the plant monsters that you found would be added. So it had some kind of collecting feature to it also. And with these 2 kids, I noticed that they were coming back to a station or a tool where you were watering the plants. And they come back to that over and over again. It had like a hose where you spray water on the plant, and some of them, they would love to get watered, so they would go like, stretch for the water, and some of them would hate it, so they would try to get away from it. And for these kids, it looked like dancing. So they started to direct little performances with the characters and started to sing. And after a while, they even started to perform with their own bodies and running around in the room. And it was really, really a nice experience for me. It reminded me of how important it is to not lock the experience into one specific path, but also leave space for other intentions than ours, the creators. And even though the app had some linearity to it with this collecting feature, it should still allow and inspire different kinds of play, as it did with these kids. And I think in our case, it's about adding tactility to the interaction, making the actual just interaction pleasurable. So you want to stay there, and you can start to make things up on your own.
This is really interesting about tactility. So one of the things, this is a thing that we did 6 or 7 years ago at Game City, which is a festival which is about place. So the idea was we would kind of interrupt unexpected locations across Nottingham with stuff you could stumble across. And people know what choose your own adventure books are? You have that idea, right? So we were trying to give, we were trying to animate the city with site-specific text adventures. So the idea was we were using a tool called Twine that people might know about, which is a really, really simple open source, non-linear, choose your own adventure making tool. And the on-ramp for Twine is incredibly shallow. Like within 10 minutes, you can be thinking about the story rather than fighting the software. So what we kind of asked these young people to do, and kind of giving them this sense of permission, was to, as quickly as possible, thinking about the story, but also the place and the specific place or time with which the story they might make could be played. So rather than the story being contained to the screen that it was on, it might be in some other location across the city, like a story that could only be played here, that would in some way refer to this. There's something on this big screen behind you, but you can't turn around and know what it is, or you kind of refer in some way to the thing that was happening. And within an hour, we based it in the library in Nottingham to start with. And within an hour, we had this one group, 2 girls were walking together, came and said, "Oh, have you got a ladder?" A ladder force is like health and safety risk, because they'd written a game that was going to be could only be played at the top of this kind of like rack of shelving where there's a laptop that you'd find up there, and the thing would be about whether you're going to fall off this ladder or not. And someone would like shape the ladder you wanted. Someone else did one in the toilets, but it's because it was a game you would play whilst you sat on the toilet for a period of time. And suddenly this, like the whole library became this quite challenging from a librarian's point of view, space with these really small acts and performances were taking place in these kind of secret and exciting places. And it's that thing of like reducing the gap. It's kind of the blank page thing, right? Of rather than this even being about literacy, necessarily it's about moments. It's about creating experiences that can just be kind of exciting and kind of naughty as possible, because then obviously they're trying to top each other. We can put a ladder in the toilet, can we do, and you get this kind of like ascending, series of liabilities that kind of come out of it. But yeah, that was the thing that excited me most that we've done.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. So we've had some really beautiful examples there of where you've encountered creativity in your sort of various professional lives. The first question I wanted to ask you all is sort of the way that which you as an individual in your work, or perhaps within your organisation, feel that you can support children and young people to develop creativity, and perhaps even thinking about our audience here, how you might encourage even sort of teachers and researchers such as ourselves to sort of develop creativity. Shauna first.
Well, I think, working at a gallery, creativity is imbued in the very essence of what we do. So this is kind of an easy-ish question for me. So we have a young people's group called the Society of Explorers, which meet every Wednesday. But because my background is in participation, it's important for me to have widened that out. So we've started, we'll start in September, a Saturday morning kids club that will run once a month. And we'll have, we've programmed some crazy stuff already, like a baby detox for the January. So like loads of sensory things. We've got audio making, using sounds from NASA. We're going to have a summer camp for teenagers, and we're also looking at how we can work with babies, really young children, and start getting them engaged in art somehow. We also support the Children's Media Conference. The Children's Media Conference has an annual exhibition called Playground. We started it at Site and now it went back to Site Gallery. We bring school groups in during the 2 weeks that it's on, and we held an event, that was a CPD event, wasn't it, with you last week, bringing teachers down to talk about how you can use the making space and making and creativity. So it's really important for me, as a gallery that focuses on new media, moving image and performance, that we are very much embedded in education and are using those modes and means to foster creativity. Does that make sense? Or did I just say words?
So I already touched upon this before, that I go around and do workshops and things, and I think what I really try and do as well is very interesting when I do a workshop and adults, the grown-ups, the parents and carers are there as well. And it's quite interesting how it feels quite sort of divided, that you get the sort of parents who want to be involved and want to help and make things, and you get other parents who are almost feel quite intimidated about the prospect of being asked to do something creative. And I think a lot of the time, we try and get kids to be creative, but kids imitate our behaviour, and if they don't see their parents or any adults around them being creative and just kind of drawing or making things or playing, I think we as adults need to play more, then they're not going to try and explore those creative avenues either. We're asking them to do something quite impossible. So in my workshops, I always really love it at the beginning when a parent will say, oh well, I'm not very creative, and they just kind of sort of push their child forward to get involved in the creative activity. And then it always just really warms my heart, as you can see throughout the duration of the workshop, that the adult will suddenly realise it's not scary, it doesn't matter, it's just about having fun and playing. And they'll get really involved and they'll get totally absorbed, sometimes even more than the child, which is it's really amazing. And at the end of it, they've made something, and they're so happy by it being a positive creative experience. So I think what I would like to strive to do is to get more adults playing as well, so it doesn't feel like we're asking children to do something that only children do because they want to do what we do. You know, that's why they like tippy-tapping on the computers. That's why, you know, you see toddlers playing with mobile phones. So they need to see kind of positive creative behaviour being demonstrated by us. So yeah, I don't know, I think I veered off the question.
I think that was fine.
I don't know what the question was. I was just saying.
Fiona and I are deliberately resisting kind of chipping in because we would have so much to say and we would take up all the time. So we're just going nodding.
So nodding's good.
Yes, nodding. Chris, do you want to get something to say?
Okay. Yeah, the vision for Tokaboka from the start in 2011 was to be a playful and creative complement to what was in the app stores at that time, which was the competitive, skill-focused gaming apps, and then educational, curriculum-focused learning apps. So the way we took on that challenge was to try to create open-ended experiences that trusts the kids to find out things on their own and decide what they want to do themselves. So we also gave ourselves the quite tricky task to never have instructions in the app. They should be self-exploratory, or you can do different things with them. And sometimes we hear that they might be a little bit tricky for grown-ups to understand, because when you open the app, not so much happens. And the goal with it might not be super clear. But most of the times we see with the kids is that they are just diving into it and exploring and making things up. And so we're talking about the concepts or the apps as toys rather than games, and try to make material for playing or for storytelling, but not providing the full story in there. There will be a visual narrative, of course. There are a lot of character design and settings, and the design of the interaction, of course, decides somewhat what you can do. But hopefully what we want the kids to do is to interpret that in their own way and build upon that. So storytelling with our apps would be my suggestion to be creative.
I don't think we're particularly good at this, I have to say, but I think there's a thing I really notice across the education, across the museums and across the public engagement. Like there's an incredibly fragile and important moment before someone has touched a computer or piece of digital something, or Raspberry Pi or whatever, and the moment when they have, and then the moment when they can decide this isn't for me, or this is engaged. I think it can be lost for years, right? If they're not in, or for life, if that moment isn't really carefully kind of mediated. And I think selecting with extraordinary amounts of care what that first experience is and what that first kind of ramp into that might be is so important. And it's impossible to kind of mediate that for everybody, but I think it's a thing that's really easy to overlook. So the different modes in which we might really carefully present whatever that first experience is to whoever that person. This isn't particularly just for young people, to be honest. I think this is particularly applicable to parents. Certainly in our work is really important. I think just as a corollary to that, I think another thing that we're also trying to resist and recapture, part of the fallout of things like the Next Gen review and the kind of march of kind of STEM education and computer science having a real kind of primacy in the digital education agenda has been a bit of a tyranny, I think, and certainly much of the discourse that comes out of the kind of games industry side of that is quite careerist, right? And we're going to need to learn how to code. None of us are going to have any jobs unless we learn Python immediately, and the problem with that is it starts to strip out the idea of the intrinsic value of learning these skills in order to self-actualize, in order to express. The same reason that you teach music or you learn music, right? I wanted to be in the street band, it didn't work out, but it's an impossible amount of value that I got from learning music as a kid, and I see this as far under the same kind of world, and I think we've really got to push back, but certainly push with equal parity to this kind of idea of the kind of vocationalising of those sort of skills. It's really important that the intrinsic value of learning how to use these tools as a mode of expression, as distinct from just a kind of skills acquisition in the vocational sense, that might not have been a good answer either.
No, that's fabulous, thank you. There is one more question I would like to ask our panel to respond to before we open it up to you to kind of ask some questions. And that is, it's kind of picking up on what Lee, that lovely image that you gave us of making a mess and the kind of license that gives you to create. It's something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of Makerspace project, and the idea that children can sometimes draw on something more easily, creatively, if you start with something as a source, something to work from. But obviously within our own field, there are lots of tensions about whether or not that is more or less successful if it's a digital source. And some people have been quite dubious about sort of digital texts and their ability to afford imagination and creativity. So the thing I wanted to ask you each to comment on was the way in which you think that the digital might help or hinder children's play and creativity, particularly in relation to literacy.
So yeah, I like to use digital as just one of many of the tools of play that are available, and I'm really mindful of walking down digital is so bad, all the kids are on their iPads for 8 hours a day. I mean, you need to parent your kids and parent them properly. You know, it's a part of a balanced diet for me. I think that there are many interesting elements of digital that are fantastic for creativity. Just using your mobile phone to take little videos of yourself or videos of your surroundings, and learning to use the camera. And recording voice notes and voice apps and changing your voice, even Snapchat filters. You know, there's lots of things there that are fantastic. And I feel like a bit of a fangirl sitting on this panel with Chris here, because I mean, Tokaboka is my life, and I still have a folder on my phone like the Tokaboka, and like it was so. Those apps are everything. Like they provide so much, and it's so smart. And looks so simple, and it's so great. And I think about how I use it with my child, and like the Toka Tea Party when we just play together, or Toka Hair Salon too. Sorry, I'm just going to list off all the games. And then play this one, and then play this one, and then play this one, and then play this one. But there's this. I feel really cautious of talking about digital as potentially negative. Yes, it's a time drain, but it's part of a diet, and it just needs to be managed.
Yeah, I feel the same. It's all in moderation, and I think the digital toolkit can add a lot, just as old school pen and paper can. And it shouldn't be one thing or the other. It's just about the expression of ideas, and it just happens to be on that format instead of that format. I think what's interesting about a digital context in terms of kids and young people is that it's self-contained, and I've talked before about, I make a mess, so then I can start because it's not intimidating. But, a lot of parents, it's hard being a parent. You don't want to have lots of mess in your house all of the time. And in a way, having all of that mess in a little flat screen, which is contained and can just be pressed, the button pressed off and the mess is gone, is a really nice thought. I wish I could do that in my studio, but I can't. And even poor Henry Hoover struggles. He's really dusty. But what was I saying? In terms of the flat screen, I think for kids, it's contained, and also it does offer a level of privacy for them. That then, once you obviously got to make sure that what your kid's doing on the flat screen is safe and everything, but for example, if you've got a lovely Tokaboka app open, you know that it's all going to be all right, and the kid has, your child has a place just to play and explore without the fear of kind of being judged that this is right or wrong. Whereas if they've got paper and pens and stuff all over the table, and you know, you said, why don't you draw a picture of the cat? And then that's quite hard for the kid, because I've got to draw a picture of the cat, and you know, mum's wandering around and she keeps looking to see how I'm getting on, and that's not going to aid any sort of joy or creativity or confidence. You know, even if the child does a picture of a cat, which is amazing, and they get praised for it, then you know, next time they'll want that praise again. And so in a way, it's on the screen, they're in control themselves, and they're not reliant on you as a parent or as an adult to, you know, tell them what's right or wrong, or whether they succeeded or failed. It's all on their own terms, which I think is a really positive thing. And I like Tokaboka stuff too.
Regarding hindering literacy, I'm thinking about the fact that a lot of kids are using games and platforms that are not made for them, but for grown-ups that also are very heavily commercialized, and it can be noisy in that sense. So it can be a struggle to navigate and get to the core of your experience, what you were looking for. So what I've seen with playing with kids is that some develop a strategy of not seeing all these messages that are thrown upon you, and just see the X to press away messages, and that works, of course, but it's not specifically creative in communicating online. So that's just something that worries me a little bit. Your relationship to texts online. At the same time, Apple just recently announced that they would be banning third-party advertising in kids' apps on their platforms. I think that's a good direction we're going in. That would probably make a difference and remove maybe some unethical developers out there. But for the positive aspect, I think it's really nice to see that some of the Tokaboka apps, specifically the Toka Life series, that is about like a dollhouse play, you could say, with a lot of characters and objects in different settings. There are a lot of kids that are much older than our target group that we had in mind that are playing those. And we see there are a lot of Instagram accounts with kids expressing themselves and telling stories and acting in characters. And there's also a lot of App Store reviews of kids saying that I am actually 13 and I know this is not for me, but I love it and I will keep playing it anyway. So there's something with role-playing. I've also read some research, maybe some of you know more about this, that pointing at role-playing might be more socially accepted, or maybe it's about the privacy that you can get on the screen, that you continue to role-play a bit further up in age in the digital environment.
I'm not completely sure I know what digital even means, and I don't know how helpful it is anymore. I have arguments at home about don't play that for as long as you are, don't watch that thing for as long as you are. I know Tom doesn't think of it as digital. He doesn't. The people that we're having this discussion with don't even. It's just stuff. It's just stuff. And I'm not sure how helpful it is to persist in kind of compartmentalising it in that kind of way. That said, we are where we are, right? And I think in particular, helping parents to, I'm going to say equip parents with the kind of critical literacy to be able to reflect on and help their kids in their care reflect upon the things that they're doing critically and kind of interestingly is kind of key to this. And I think that practitioners and creators, and particularly in the mainstream, so that like Tokaboka kind of independent work already participates in that very, very well. But the vast majority of kind of product that's being consumed in the mainstream games industry just isn't being proactive enough at all in helping parents understand what this work is. And I don't mean that in the sense of don't play for more than 2 hours else you'll get epilepsy. I mean, in a much more kind of positive, if you are interested in this and you want to talk to, like how do you do that? How do you, once you're over that kind of hump that this stuff isn't necessarily evil, okay, so what then? There's no, it's just a vacuum for parents after that point, and I think that's such a problem and opportunity.
Can I just jump in with something? I find that really interesting. And when I worked at Hofstra, which is for babies, very young children, preschool. The parents we were supporting actually were so young themselves. Like this, talking about digital wasn't a problem to them because they completely got it. They were, much younger than me. So it was like, oh, how long is this a problem for? Maybe this is just a problem for like the next 20 years, and everybody will just move on.
You can imagine it will be right. It's just continuum of stuff that's happening.
It's really helpful that you say that as Fiona and I launch our MA in digital literacies for but actually, serious point. We've grappled with this ourselves because clearly nobody ever said, come and do a course with us looking at analogue literacies, or although we had many other types of ways of thinking about literacies. I think we hang on to it in our sector to the kind of differentiating it because of that desire to emphasise the opportunity and the possibility, which is why. But it's really interesting that as in the sector that's kind of leading the way in terms of designing and creating opportunities for children to play, it now seems very old school, and we're kind of, as researchers and educators, still needing to kind of catch up a bit with. At the moment, it still feels like it's a terrain we need to have a bit of ability to define and argue for, particularly in our school curriculum. I'm not going to speak anymore. I'm going to keep my promise, and we're going to throw it open to the floor. We do have, Chris did also have another really interesting question that we can pursue if you're all questioned out, but do feel free to put hands up and ask questions now. I don't know if people want to do roving mic.
Yeah, roving mic.
Roving mic? Are you running? Or
I'm happy to run.
Shall I start with, so Chris actually suggested a question when we were in discussion preparing for this session, which was about how the digital could be used more in our own research, in creative work with children. That is kind of lots of people here at this conference talking about co-production and working in participatory ways. So I don't know if any of you guys have comments on how you think the digital, how your tools that you kind of engage with regularly could be used in that kind of context. Any thoughts? Or maybe we should start with Chris, because it was her question.
Yes, I think my question was if I'm allowed to correct you.
Of course.
But similar, but if you have any methods that you use for involving kids in your creative process or for evaluating what you're doing. So, and my answer would be just lately I've done an interview study where I've been talking to kids and parents together as a pair. And that has been really interesting, I think, I've been spending a lot of time with kids alone and a little bit with parents, and this specific study was about monetization, so maybe not the most creative part of the development of products, but it was so interesting to see the dynamics that is the context of the use of the products we're developing. So you can get the kids' view of how they will use it and what they think about it, but what are framing what they can experience. And I thought that was super interesting to have that conversation with parents and kids together.
So we have 10 minutes. Oh, that's time for 10 whole questions.
I was going to follow up on that if there's no questions. So one of the, not to big you up, Becky, but I know one of the things that we found really, really valuable, because we just wouldn't do it, right? Because I think it's true of many practitioners. It might just be us who aren't very organised, but I know many practitioners are too busy making the stuff to necessarily create the space or resource to reflect and evaluate and have a different perspective. And I think that's probably true of lots of people making work in different ways, certainly within the commercial sector. And I think there's an opportunity, I think this is what you're asking, to kind of build bridges much more proactively towards, particularly like a growing and emergent kind of independent development sector, because they're easier to talk to begin to bring some of the kind of apparatus of research and reflection, evaluation to that process, which I think they'd be very kind of welcome of. So I mean, some of the work that you did on the Story Smash, this was part of a literacy thing you did across Nottinghamshire libraries. The evaluation that you did on that wasn't like we would never have done that, and that's uncovered things about that allowed us to understand and codify a process that we had, but we couldn't really describe it. Like we just kind of did it, and we didn't exactly know what it was in order to be able to describe to the next person what it was. So do you know what I mean? I think that's...
Yeah, it's really interesting. So Story Smash, this is how I first encountered Ian, and I have to confess that the paper is still not even submitted. It's really nearly there. But the evaluation was a nice, quick, something we could get out there, which the people that funded the project, which was the Arts Council and others, there were multiple partners in that project, looked at. And I know many of you, we've got Angela here at Culvert and John Potter, and I know lots and lots of you will work with various different kind of creative partners, but working with creative partners who can really, I know they're all super busy and have multiple things that they're dealing with, but actually can enter into a dialogue with you, so we started that project with, we're looking for how does gaming increase positive attitudes to literacy in libraries. So not what was interesting. What was interesting was the way that Twine is a tool that enables children to write and have to write multiple narratives. So if they start with one storyline, they can't leave it at that. They actually have to write loads. And suddenly you're seeing things about children's storytelling that certainly I hadn't seen. Very dark journeys for some of them, as Shauna was saying right at the very beginning, some kind of things that we don't necessarily always imagine, and we certainly don't see in the classroom emerging from the sorts of stories they want to tell once they get past the idea that there is only one narrative that they have to tell in that context. So the opportunities to work with organisations and individuals in this sector, I think, is really important, because UKLA values texts made for children, and we have to have an industry and organisations that make fantastic products, content, texts for children, and our engagement is important to them too. I think there's a real kind of important sort of synergies in that work. I know we have this. There's all sorts of creative models of, the author goes off into their kind of lonely place and writes their novel, but of course they don't. They're always experiencing, and just as these guys. And so I think the more we can have these dialogues. So I'm not reading, I'm refusing to read the non-asking of any questions as a kind of, why are they here? This is not about books, but I think it's really important that we build conversations with people from the creative industries, from creative organisations, and we've had some quite useful discussions about what literacy actually even is. What does it mean? I think there was a bit of an assumption that we would only be interested in teaching, how does an app teach grammar? And of course that's not what we're all interested in. So I hope that we have raised some of that for you.
Is this supposed to be about books? No, you're all right. You're all right. You're on.
Oh, yes, roving light.
I was just thinking about that sort of in terms of the benefits of the games. In a very crowded app space, how do you market something to get to kids? Because what I think of is the only game I play on my phone is Words with Friends, which is a kind of Scrabble. And you can get points by watching videos, and it's basically remakes of Tetris, as far as I can tell. And some of it more recently has been rescue a person on an iceberg by choosing the right thing. But in an app space that is so saturated with stuff, how do you market your product to the key audience, or how do you say it can increase a certain set of skills that a parent would be interested in?
I can talk about that a little bit from the Hopster perspective. So I can tell you it's really hard. You had to make friends with the App Store manager, the UK App Store manager became a friend of ours. We would have to make sure that we put it in the right category, and there's always talk about, should we be in education, should we be in entertainment, should we be in family, should we, like, say we're 6+, but we're actually 3+, and there's lots of, like, negotiating. Then there's lots of work that you have to do on the keywords, and the App Store description has to be perfect, so you have to do a lot of research about what works. Your screenshots have to be precise. You have to upload so many versions of different sizes, making sure that they stand out. And the more you do to your App Store description, the more chance the App Store managers have a chance of seeing it, and then they call you and then they say, oh, you know, prepare some assets, which means that you might be chosen for App of the Week. Then if you were chosen for App of the Week, then you'd see a massive spike in your sales, and that'd be great. But then there was a lot of work that we had to do with parental bloggers, sending them codes for the app to make sure that they would have a chance to test it, write blogs about it, pass it on to their groups, join Facebook groups where mums and dads were, doing little parties in local parks. Like, it was, yeah, it's a lot of work, and like you say, the App Store was just completely saturated. I don't know if I'd even advise doing it.
I have a very good idea on this front. So I talked about Natalia. I don't know if Natalia is here. Natalia at the very back, who runs the wonderful Digital Book Award each year for UKLA, and I always think we should have one that's for kind of broader digital content. So perhaps we can help with that. How teachers navigate is by, in the same way as that we have book awards, we have awards that signpost people to some really fantastic quality content that's made specifically for children, and that has their kind of needs and aspirations in mind. We have to finish fairly soon, unless there is another pressing question. No? Okay, I'll go on.
We've got one. Yeah.
Yay!
Thank you. Thank you. It's been really fascinating listening to you. I was interested to hear, Chris, the way that you engage with play testing with the parents and the children. And I just wondered if you could say a little more about a moment where that play testing led to a change, a significant change to the product, for example. And that's for anyone on there.
Yeah, I heard, I don't remember who it was before, I heard someone referring to a magic moment happening in research, and that was something that we were looking for a lot in the beginning. We were trying to understand what kind of products we were supposed to make, what would be the greatest experience for the kids. So we were trying very broadly different kinds of concepts, and we were really looking for the magic moment, for the laughter, for the, like, when it breaks through. And one very early example is from the Toka Tea Party app, is that I had an idea about exactly what you were mentioning, or maybe you were mentioning, the messiness.
Over the cup.
Yeah, what can you do? What can you do digital that you're not allowed to do in real life? What could we add to the very common tea party play that happens all the time outside the digital? And we tried this little thing with, when you are drinking your lemonade in your little cup, it could fall over and mess up the table, and you have a napkin. And that proved to be that magic moment for us in that product, and we really tried to find that again in all the other concepts.
That's really interesting, thank you. Yeah, so looking for those moments of joy and playfulness and thinking how you might.
Yeah, and then you really need to meet a lot of kids, and you need to try during the whole design process. We like to dare to try really early on, maybe on paper prototyping even, and some early digital prototypes to be able to act on it when you find it also.
I think that paying attention to children and how they play obviously connects us really nicely to our keynote this morning. We now do need to end. I'm just going to say, I got in first. I have already got my signed copy from Shana, but she is signing upstairs, I think, down here in the bookshop after the next session, if anybody would like to get her to sign wonderful music. So thank you to our panel very much. Thank you.